Right, so hello and welcome back to Books and Things and welcome to another video. And today is the first in a short series of Walter Scott Prize reviews. So, as I spoke about in a video recently, which I will link down below, I am trying to read my way through at least a substantial chunk of the long list of the Walter Scott Prize, which is a prize for historical fiction that I have followed on and off in previous years and really enjoy, and this year I thought I would actually try and read a good chunk of it. Hello, this is editing Katie from the future here. So since I filmed this video, the shortlist for the Walter Scott Prize has actually been announced, so I will put a link down to that below so that you can have a look at what made the shortlist, and I will talk through my thoughts on the shortlist in a bit more depth in my next Walter Scott Prize review video. I am very pleased to see The Western Wind on there. I'm sad that The Washington Black isn't on there, but regardless, I'll let myself in the past go on with the video and tell you about those books. So far I have read 3 books. 2 of them I read before the longest was announced, 1 I've read in the last few weeks, and then I've got 3 books out from the library currently which I'm hoping to read in the next few weeks to give you another update / review video at the end of that. So I'm going to be reviewing the books for the long list in sort of 2s and 3s, depending on how many I end up reading, but I have 3 books to talk to you about today. I'm going to go in order from my least favourite to my favourite, because that seems to make sense in terms of me working out what I would like to win the Walter Scott Prize. My least favourite but one that I've read from the long list so far would definitely be Warlight by Michael Ondate, which I read very recently. I listened to this on audiobook, and my main feeling about this book was that I just didn't get it. So this is set in London shortly after the Second World War and follows a boy called Nathaniel and his sister Rachel, and what happens when their parents kind of vanish shortly after the Second World War. Their parents tell them that they're going to Singapore for a year. Their father goes away, their mother follows shortly afterwards, but then a while after that, Nathaniel and Rachel discover their mother's suitcase still in their cellar. They realise that she has not gone to Singapore, and after a year has passed, neither their mother or father have returned. And they live this kind of weird, odd life with their guardian, a friend of their parents who they call the Moth, who inhabits their old home and kind of populates it with various of his friends and associates, many of whom seem to be slightly dodgy and a bit criminal. And one of his friends is a man called the Darter, who befriends and kind of becomes a bit of a father figure for Nathaniel, while the Moth becomes a father figure for Rachel. And half the book follows Nathaniel as a teenager in this sort of weird state of existence after the Second World War, and then the second half of the book looks at Nathaniel kind of looking back on his life and his relationship with the various people he was living with and knew as a late teenager when in his late teens, and also about his kind of relationship with his mother and him discovering where she actually was all those years. I had mixed feelings. I enjoyed the writing quite a lot. Like, the writing is very nice on a sentence by sentence level. It was nice and it reminded me of kind of Kazuo Ishiguro style writing, but the book lacked a Kazuo Ishiguro style focus. In fact, for me, it lacked any focus. Like, I just didn't know what it was about and I just didn't get it. And I'm sure there are a lot of people who did. It's the kind of book where I feel like I wish I'd read it for a book club, because then it would be really interesting to have a discussion with lots of other people and find out what they thought about it and what they enjoyed about it and what they got from it. Because I just finished and I was like, oh, I just don't really know what happened there. One of the critics' reviews that was listed on the kind of page on the audiobook that I was listening to described it as dreamlike, and I would definitely say that the Warlight is a very, very dreamlike book, but for me, not in a good way. It was very rambling and meandering, and I couldn't find the centre, and I felt like I wanted it completely restructured, because we get kind of Nathaniel's life and then we get him looking back, but I feel like they should have been intermingled much more. And then the Moth and the Darter were, for me, 2 characters who are really similar and I found really hard to distinguish, and I kind of wish the book was rewritten as a version where they were one person, because I didn't really understand what the kind of purpose of having both of them was. And I think in many ways, I couldn't work out what the purpose of the book was, and I think maybe that's part of the point, and I found it rambly and confusing, and again I think that's part of the point. And I do genuinely think this is one of those books where it's not that I think it's a bad book, it's just that I didn't get it and it wasn't for me. So I enjoyed the writing though, so I think I would be interested to read something by Michael Ondate in the future, but I didn't love this, especially because for me, although it is historical fiction, it didn't engage with history that much. But I don't know, maybe that's not fair, because one of the kind of things about the rambling, dreamlike quality of it, I think it's supposed to be to do with post-World War II Britain being in disarray and rules no longer applying kind of thing. I think there's probably a lot of symbolism in there that I don't quite get. So it was interesting, but yeah, I didn't love that one at all. Then, the other 2 books I want to talk about today are Washington Black by Essie Edgergon and The Western Wind by Samantha Harvey. My ordering of these is a bit more arbitrary because I loved both of these a lot, and I would be very happy if either of these won the Walter Scott Prize. When I first read The Western Wind several months ago, I rated it 4 stars on Goodreads, and when I read Washington Black several months ago, I rated it 5 stars. On reflection, I think I would rate both of them 4.5 stars, were Goodreads to allow me to do half stars, and actually I think both of these are really fantastic books. So yeah, let me talk about The Western Wind first. This is set in the late 15th century in a small village, and it follows the events that unfold when a man drowns in the river, and no one can quite work out whether or not this was an accident or whether this man has been killed. And our main character, our narrator, who is the local priest, is kind of in the centre of the inquiry and also kind of receiving confession from everyone in the village who may or may not have been involved. There are a lot of things that I love about this book. It looks really brilliantly at issues of religion and morality and how religious figures are sort of held to different standards of morality than other people, which is something I find really interesting in a lot of Victorian literature, and it's really nice to read it in a contemporary historical fiction looking back on an earlier time. And it also looks really interestingly at kind of character relationships and gossip and kind of community in a small village. But the thing that I think really makes this book stand out, that really makes it wonderful, is the structure. This book works backwards. We start on day 4, then we go to day 3, day 2, day 1, and we work backwards until the moment of the man who drowns, so that we kind of get to learn slowly what's happened as the action kind of unfolds in reverse, which is really cool and really, really fantastic. And I think this book is so wonderful. I think the reason why I gave it 4 stars when I first finished it was because it worked backwards. The ending is therefore a slight anticlimax, but that's like the point, because it's worked backwards, so the ending is actually the beginning. I also think because this is the 3rd book I've read by Samantha Harvey, I think she's a really, really talented, wonderful writer, and she taught me on my creative writing masters, and she's really lovely as well. And I love this a lot, but I think my favourite book by her is still Dear Thief, which is the first one I read by her, which I just adore and really would like to reread, actually. I also need to read there's one book by her I have on my shelf which I haven't read yet, All His Songs. I need to read that too. But so therefore I also feel like whenever you read a book by an author where you're like, well, actually, I love this book a lot, but I don't love it quite as much as another book by them, I therefore think that changes the way you judge it, whereas like with Washington Black, I haven't read anything else by her, so I don't judge it in comparison to anything. Whereas like, I mean, this is fantastic. In some ways, I think it might be a better novel than Dear Thief, but I love Dear Thief a little bit more, and I don't quite know why, but one of the things I really love about Samantha Harvey is that all of her books are so different, really, really different, and that's kind of wonderful. So yeah, I think this is fantastic, and yeah, I'd be very happy if this won. But I'd also be very, very happy if Washington Black won, because this is amazing, and I loved it, and it's very, very, very much my kind of book. It is set in 1830s America, and we follow a young boy called Washington Black. He grows up as a slave on a plantation, and this book follows what happens when his master's brother decides to take him away, and kind of together they sort of escape from the plantation and go on an adventure, but it's so much more complicated than this. Like, this book is fantastic for being both an adventure novel and a novel that deals with incredibly serious, hard-hitting themes with incredibly emotive moments. And the characterization in here, and the detail, and the very unusual, like, themes in it in many ways were just wonderful. Like, this book is really unusual. I think that's one of the things I love about it so much, is that it's very, for me, it felt very unique and very original, and there's a lot of things in it that I really, really enjoyed, especially the role that science plays in this. Washington Black kind of gets interested in science and in marine life and biology, which is just very, very interesting and something I don't encounter in books very much. And so this book looks not only at Washington's life kind of growing up as an ex-slave and what that means, and growing up as a black man, often in countries where most people are white, and how people treat him, but also being a black man in science in the early 19th century and what that means, and how different people, even the people who want to kind of help him, sort of inadvertently take advantage of him. It's really fantastic. It reminded me a bit of kind of Dickens and Jules Verne in the writing style, and is really, really amazing. Like, I really, really would recommend this a lot, and I hope it wins, but also I kind of hope the Western Wind wins. It's very hard, especially because, like, I think in some way I probably have slightly more attachment to Washington Black as a book than I do to The Western Wind, but I have a much greater attachment to Samantha Harvey as an author than I do to Essie Adjogwan, because I've only read one book by her. So anyway, that's beside the point. I've got to read plenty more books on the long list. There might be another one that I decide is really the one I want to win. But this is really good. Like I said, when I first read it, I gave it 5 stars on Goodreads. I had originally read it in one day on holiday, and it's not tiny, and I loved that. But actually, I think also, like with The Western Wind, I found the ending of this a little bit of an anticlimax. And I think, like with The Western Wind, it's supposed to be. And I think that's because it's kind of an anticlimax for the character too, and that's the point. But I also, therefore, didn't find it, like, completely and utterly satisfying in the end. But I also loved it, so yeah. Anyway, basically, so far on my Walter Scott long list reading, I love The Western Wind, I love Washington Black, I do not love Warlight, and that is pretty much all for today. The 3 Walter Scott books I currently have out from the library are All the Lives We Never Live by Anuradha Roy, After the Party by Cressida Connolly, and The Long Take by Robin Robertson. I think I'm probably going to read this first because it's a novel in verse, so I don't think it will take me very long to get through. And then I think I'll probably read maybe this, I'm not sure. I'm looking forward to these 3 a lot, especially these 2. So my next Walter Scott Prize long list review video should be on these 3, so hopefully I enjoy them. And I think that's all for today. Do let me know if you've read any of the books I spoke about today and what you thought of them, and I'll be back very soon with another bookish video.